Hello. Today we're going to talk about groups and teams, how to increase performance using groups and teams, and also a lot about the group development process and a few things that you'll need to know. A lot of this stuff is also mentioned in the text in a different way, but first of all, the idea of what is a group? Can a group be one person? Obviously not. It's more than one person interacting, generally freely interacting individuals, and there is some sense of a common identity there, and shared norms. We'll distinguish that from a team, but I'm not going to make it. I'm never going to ask you to actually determine, well, is this a work group, and at what time does it become a team? We're not going to. The distinction is blurred all the time, but we do look at these different descriptions and definitions because they are useful. People form groups for reasons because we can accomplish more as a team. Work groups become teams because we can accomplish more, and people work in groups because they can accomplish more than they can as individuals. And you'll find that generally when you join a work group, it's for a specific purpose. And we'll talk about different types of work groups and different types of teams. We'll also talk about the roles, the different kinds of roles that people play on teams, and we'll look at again starting right now with formal and informal groups. A formal group is just what it sounds like. It's generally started by the organization, and it's given specific goals. Sometimes they're called work groups in the organization, sometimes they're called teams. They might even be called something more specific like a committee or a task force. Task forces generally have a very short duration or a very specific and narrow task. And we'll talk about how you as a manager can create norms on a team or work to create norms on a team and contribute to the creation of norms on a team. Work groups and teams to a larger extent fulfill individual needs and group needs, and we'll talk about some of them for a moment now. There's a lot of that in the textbook, personal problem-solving mechanisms, things like that we'll mention for a second now too. But they tend to reduce anxiety when you're working together well, and again make people more productive, make numbers of people more productive. What is a role? A role is an expected behavior. They tend to be associated with specific job titles, but not exclusively. The roles are defined by, again, these expectations, and they include things like both specific duties and also some things that really extend beyond the specifically sort of expressed duties associated with a job. Helping teammates, suggesting improvements, those are the kinds of things that you do that are, often, again, unspecified aspects, unspecified roles, the ones that are not included in your list of performance of your duties and responsibilities. A norm, on the other hand, is kind of an attitude or a feeling that's shared within an organization, and again shared by the members of a group, by those two or more members that make up the group. They do create orders. They allow the group to function, really, because if you don't know what to expect, you're not going to be able to be successful and work smoothly together. Norms do tend to be more encompassing than roles, because they're shared by the work group or the division or the organization as a whole. And they tend to be unwritten, whereas roles are more often written. So we look at how you reinforce those norms. They're generally, because they're so important for the survival of the group, they're really necessary to clarify the values of the organization. So again, norms are reinforced through lots of different activities like that. Sometimes they do emerge on their own. Other times there is some conscious effort associated with them. getting people together, saying, we have a passion for what we do. We always want to do things the best, and you certainly see this in some of the some of the really more super successful high technology firms, and lots of others as well. The way they're reinforced often is through peer pressure, as you can imagine. We don't leave things up to chance. For example, is an example of one instance of a norm. And again, peer pressure is probably the key way that norms are reinforced. Now let's begin looking at the stages of group development and see that, again, you see the group forms initially, that initial part of the team. There's the initial stage. There's people are really just still getting to know each other, and there's not a lot of trust in the well, let's take a look at these individually. There's not a lot of trust in at that stage in the development of a team, of a work group or a team. You'll notice, again, in common parlance, in general conversation, we tend to use those terms interchangeably. We are talking about a work group now, which may or may not really evolve into being a true team, but we'll sometimes call it a team anyway. And it's really an aspirational thing. You call your team a team, and it begins to develop some of that really shared values behavior that goes beyond just being a work group, and we'll talk about some of those distinctions in a little while. Moving on from there, when people really don't know what's going on and haven't really built any trust, to a storming stage where they think they know what they want, they know what they want to be, but you really have to sort of find your place in that power structure, and during a period like this, you might fight over or have disagreements over, really who's in charge of what aspect and who has precedence in the decision-making process. They'll probably exhibit some behaviors that are really non-productive, and that's something that has to be resolved over time. The next stage we call the norming stage, and here you begin to develop that kind of matter-of-fact approach to things, and develop the cohesiveness that you really need to be successful as a successful work group, and ultimately as a successful team. The performing stage is really sort of the prime of life of a team in this life cycle system, and there's lots of helping behavior. That's really what we're talking about here. That sometimes you're going to anticipate what people want, what people need, what your role should be, and then that can become you see that very often that this is the thing you look forward to. This is the purpose that you made the team for. Adjourning, again, every group in one way or another has a beginning and an end, even though they can last for presumably decades. But generally speaking, they tend to be a lot shorter than that. And this sort of taxonomy, this system, or this description, life cycle description, applies to really every different kind of a team. And you can see that even though in some teams the norming stage might only take, or even the storming stage might only take almost moments. It's just something that can be resolved really quickly. Sometimes people on the team already know each other fairly well. They've been on other teams that were similar, and these different stages can have different durations depending on the stage that you're at. So if we take another quick look again, to review quickly, these are the kinds of challenges you face in the forming stage, and the challenges you face in the storming stage, which are probably more dramatic, and the reason you want to look at them, you can end up with hostility. You can end up with real conflict, and that's the kind of thing that you want to contain the best you can. You'll also find that the formation of coalitions and cliques, hopefully you want that to decay over time, and really have that much more of a we feeling within your organization, and again, clarifying expectations that really is something that can happen through sort of something of a conflict process. The norming stage, again, we talked about this, the challenges of holding the team together, that, you can spend a lot of energy doing that, but it's probably worthwhile in a lot of instances. You sometimes the team will think that things are resolved and they aren't. You're kind of almost cycling back and forth. It's almost like a loop within the norming and performing stage where, things are still getting resolved, but they're getting resolved a little bit or way more smoothly, more amicably than they are during the storming stage. And of course, the performing stage, again, the challenges are improving and progressing through the task. It's always best, especially if you're in a particularly turbulent or dynamic environment. It's always best to be able to convene, to get together, to form the team quickly, to go through whatever storming stage you have to go through, and to get to the performing stage quickly, and then to disband again equally quickly. That a lot of the most agile companies work with teams of a very short duration. Sometimes just even a day or two if it's a problem-solving team. Obviously longer for, in a lot of other instances. So let's ask a little question here. Teams generally start to come together as coordinated units during the blank stage of team development. Okay. Note I said start to come together as coordinated units. Probably got that right, but if not, I thought the hint would help during the storming, during the norming stage. And again, we'll ask a couple more questions here that again, I know students like to practice with these questions because they do count ultimately. If you can answer these kinds of multiple choice questions. So let's take another look at another one here. Franco is part of a group which must resolve a quality control issue at his company. Franco is worried about what the group expects from him and is not sure who's in charge. What stage of group development is this likely at this time? Okay. Now you may be thinking of another one too, but the answer here is forming. You see some aspect, you think of some aspect of, not sure that, you sort of anticipating the storming stage, but you are really just anticipating, and this is actually, that not sure who's in charge, that if you're really conflicted over who's in charge and things are really heating up, then that's really when we enter that storming stage. So have some idea of what we mean by this whole sort of progression, and understand what these terms mean, and I think you'll feel pretty comfortable with it. Now here's a question that that you should know the answer to because you were given a hint earlier. How does a team differ from a committee or a task force? There is no difference in the terms' meanings. A task force is more permanent. A team is more permanent, generally more permanent. Team's role is pretty much always limited to making recommendations, and the task force is more fully integrated into the organizational structure. Again, sort of that duration thing going on again. So you should have the answer to this right, because I did give it to you earlier in this this session's videos. So you've got sort of something to go on here. Another term that you need to know that well, let's make sure that you've been catching up on that. Blank is the term that, or let's say that you've been caught up on that from the reading or from your own experience. Blank is the term that describes the ability of a team to achieve more than its members could do as individuals. That kind of 1 + 1 = 3 math that we talked about, probably mentioned a little bit earlier in another context. So let's see what you have here. Some of those other numbers, some of those other answers reflect a little bit of synergy, but the answer, the definition, the word that's defined by this is in fact synergy. Okay, so let's take a look now at teams and the power, the idea of having a common purpose, of really sharing accountability and the whole idea. We'll talk about specific teams also. But let's take a look at how, first of all, how a team is different from a work group. And again, we're talking about this in a general sense. You're not going to have to identify whether something is in specifically a team or a work group, again, because we tend to chat about them, to speak about them, and using the same terms. But we really, but teamwork is the thing that is the goal generally, even of most work groups, if when they really become that productive. We'll talk about the idea of a team, and we have a definition of a team: a small number generally of people with complementary skills committed to a common purpose. Okay, we did have that with a work group too. Common performance goals, and an approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Okay, so really, when you succeed, I succeed, and when we succeed, I succeed, you succeed. It's all. There is that we-ness that is really much more firmly ingrained or deeply ingrained than it is in a work group. Besides, they really are the cornerstone of successful work life, especially in today's very competitive economy. And there needs to be a level of trust in order to be successful in a team. When does a team become when does a work group become a team? And again, you're not going to have to draw that line at any point. But when leadership becomes a shared activity, when everybody is able to take some kind of a responsibility for leading aspects of the organization, of the team, accountability is no longer strictly individual, but it is, you're mutually accountable for and to each other. And when problem solving becomes something that you're comfortable with as a way of life, rather than just as a sort of an occasional thing that everybody, we have a problem, somebody has to solve it. It's much more like the team works more smoothly and interacts, the components interact more smoothly to solve problems, or to anticipate problems, or to prevent problems. And of course, effectiveness of the team is generally measured by the total outcome, the actual outcome and productivity of the team. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no individual rewards. There can be some individual rewards, but there will be some, or in fact, significant team rewards as well. And getting people involved in group problem solving, in mentoring, conflict management, applying their conflict management skills, and really using and demonstrating emotional intelligence is also a characteristic of a successful team. So you'll see, as mentioned in the book, there are certain competencies of team players and team members that they contribute to the team's work, obviously, and interact constructively, which is kind of what we said about the emotional intelligence is also plays a big part in that. They keep the team on track, and expect and demand and get quality work from all the team members. You also want to be sure that the people that are successful on a team, again, these teamwork competencies, the people that will be successful on a team generally possess those KSAs. We talk about them other times too, and the textbook talks about this sort of this the 3 C's of team players: committed, collaborative, and competent. That's the kind of question I might ask later on, but it should be a fairly obvious answer to you in most contexts. Another problem, if you've ever been on a team, I know I always ask my students, do you want us to break up into teams and do team projects? And I know that I may have mentioned I've had a bad experience myself once when I was in business school, where I had a really high stakes project that I had, and I was assigned to a team, and there weren't enough people that were really on that team. There weren't enough members that were really willing to put in the effort, and the outcome was very disappointing. Because they were coasting on other people's efforts, and that's really what we're talking about on when we discuss social loafing. We'll talk about some of these other aspects in a little bit more detail too. But that overall tendency to work less because you're part of a team, again, that is what we call social loafing, and you can get away with it. The bigger the team, the easier it is to get away with it. There's also other ways to prevent social loafing, which we'll talk about as well. A smaller group is less likely, your efforts are more recognized, whether they're for better or for worse. Making free riders visible, because everybody does have some individual responsibilities, and of course making things clear and having individual rewards as well. All right, so you also want to include those in your managerial and team member toolbox. Now we'll take a look at something else here. We're going to take a little discussion, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit later in the term as well. Self-managed teams, where the idea that managers manage and team and members do the work, and that's the way it is. And you don't, this is your role, and that's how it is. In fact, in the present workplace, there are managers, and they have roles and they have important responsibilities, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But we're looking more and more at individual people taking on these managerial roles, and well, you'll see that this is very different from the sort of the centralized organizational and traditional. We talked about that traditional hierarchy. This is really a little bit different because the team adopts oversight for a lot of things that were traditionally the role of managers. A lot of companies will talk about being self-managed when they really haven't really achieved that level, and there'll be some degree of chaos, some degree of conflict within the organization. That they may retain some of the managers who really aren't appropriate for this type of an environment, and that can create again its own set of problems. You really have to prep the organization and the teams for taking over this new enlarged role. Now let's take a little look at a preview of some stuff that we're really going to be spending time on in a couple of subsequent classes. First of all, a virtual team, again, one that is not face-to-face. What in general, they tend to be more hierarchical. Is that true? Are they less costly to manage? Are they generally teams that recommend things? Do they offer no competitive advantage? And do they improve in performance when social interaction is minimized? Again, you've got people separate, and I guess to some extent you might be looking at, well, I won't try to lead you on in the wrong direction. I'm pretty sure most of you got this answer right, okay? They are less costly to manage than face-to-face teams. You don't have to heat the place, you don't have to air condition it, you don't even have to provide it. So those are real savings. Again, there are costs associated, and the book talks about them a lot, and we will, spend some time talking about them too. But looking at as that little sort of pre-test question, let's look at the definition of a virtual team. We know, for example, one of the main benefits, or the idea that people are free of the constraints of time and space, so that you've got you don't have to have everybody together. You don't have to have everybody together at a specific time or a specific place. So that sort of eliminates some of the challenges of geographical distance, which are significant in today's global economy, and a lot of the things that are the same as what members face in face-to-face tasks. They still have to share information and make decisions and complete tasks and coordinate what they're doing, and that can that can create some disadvantages also. We'll take a look at some of the main advantages in a little bit of detail. We talked about the real estate diverse KSAs, because you can find people with skills without having to actually locate them to the same place. Diverse markets, obviously, again, you've got a global economy and a global internet, so a global communication system. Commuting and travel expenses, again, that's great for a worker that's well suited to being a virtual employee. Some people don't really respond well to that kind of thing, but you will find that that many people really appreciate the opportunity and really welcome the opportunity to be able to reduce their travel expenses and time time spent, and again, work-life conflicts can be reduced, and that can create some problems too, because people say, well, you're there, can't you do this too while you're home? And in fact, you're all working, and that does create some problems. We'll talk about that. And again, you can attract people and retain people that you wouldn't be able to have. Not every town is that attractive to a lot of the the top talent, and our town, for example, is. It's not a big city. It doesn't offer some of the advantages that some people want. Of course, many of us find the advantages of a smaller city to be to more than compensate for that. Disadvantages, again, hard to establish cohesion. You're not really feeling close to the people because you never interact with them face to face. You're sort of missing out. You can look at these other things too, and you can see the lack of collegiality, and really very specifically the thing that I look at in the times that I have been able to be involved in to some extent in something like this, and even in my current role, I don't interact face to face with a lot of the colleagues in my department who could offer me some benefit, and I to them. what we call the water cooler effect, the idea that you just bump into people and you can benefit from that. For example, just talking about the water cooler effect, this is not about virtual teams now. In Pixar, I know I always talk about Steve Jobs. You just had to watch a video of Steve Jobs. That's just the way it is. But and again, I've said, the times that I saw him, that I was just in the room with him in person, I never really interacted with him. But there was something really magical about that man. But what he did in Pixar, he laid out the office in a way that people would pass each other all the time. He'd put the restrooms all the way down the hall, away from everybody, so everybody from every office would have to walk by each other, at least periodically. It was really. It was a genius move, just like so many of his other moves. And again, I'm not going to go into my whole groupie role here, but it was a really an impressive concept. And again, the missing water cooler effect can be a real it can be a real disadvantage to virtual teams. The absence of the water cooler effect. What are some of the best practices? Adapting communications, learning how some people function better with email. I know you don't, you all think you can text everything, but email plays a pretty big role for mature people especially, but probably for everybody else, for you as well. Share the love really is the idea, and it's not about love, it's about social connections and working that out. Productive relationships, again, that is, you want to encourage that somehow, sometimes by bringing them together at least periodically, other times just by creating some kind of a forum for them to collect together in cyberspace. Want to make people feel like they're partners with each other and not just employees, not just people that happen to get a paycheck from the same company. The topic of availability is know when people can be reached. There are times when you do want to communicate synchronously, obviously, and in the same time, and that it's an important thing to have a system for making that clear to people. People work at different paces, working at different time zones. Some projects. The great advantage is the projects can receive attention 24/7 or 24 hours a day anyway. So when it's time, you have a good system for when you have to pass things off from one time zone to the next. If it is a process that's ongoing, that's that cumulative and not portioned out into different work responsibilities. And you, of course, whether you're the boss or not, or whether you're being required by the boss, you want to keep people updated with what you're doing, because it's, that creates that supports much more that synergy and that cohesiveness that you want to have in a team, and again, be elusive in a virtual team. The best virtual team workers are the ones who are most self-reliant, most self-motivated. That tends to be true in most work situations, but it's especially true in this kind of an environment, and the communication skills, again, the communication skills are essential, but they tend to be a little bit different than the communication skills in a face-to-face environment. Often, virtual team members have a variety of tools to use, and some people that aren't really great at face-to-face communication, which is a really valuable skill in a traditional type of a team. With a virtual team, they may be able to make up for that in other settings. You can edit the videos if you're making presentations virtually. You can edit them. So let's take a look at another question here. Kiera is trying to quickly establish a team to find the root cause of a quality issue, defective airbags, which involve her company's suppliers and dealers. She should do all the following except: clearly explain the purpose, assume the problem can be solved by a single department, have each member share details, establish how information will be shared, and explain how conflicts will be resolved. So what do you think? Well, assuming that it can be solved by a single department is probably quite a stretch. You're dealing with your dealers and your suppliers, and you have to assume that there's a lot more going on here, and you do want to establish a cross-functional team, most likely, and that would be the choice that you'd probably come up with. Now, the book talks a lot about the high-performing teams, and the high-performing teams, the ones that really do the You know, the team seem to stand out. They create interdependency. That's what the participative leadership is about. Shared responsibility. We did talk about that already, but this is one where really everybody feels personally responsible for what happens and how the team performs. Aligned on purpose. Everybody believes that in the purpose of the team. They're all on the same page, as the cliche goes. High communication, meaning high and really high quality communication. In this instance, it's often related to trust. That is a key indicator of trust, having that really high quality communication. Future focused. They embrace change. They see it as an opportunity for growth, personal growth and growth within the organization as well. And keeping meetings focused. The idea of staying focused on the task. It's easy sometimes to get sidetracked when you're attempting to make something happen, something new, and you really do have to stay on task. And that's again, Steve Jobs is such a classic example of that. That sort of singleness of purpose and passion that creates the kinds of real industry changes, world-changing kinds of products and concepts, and creative talents again. You've got to attract creative people, and you've got to create the kind of environment that encourages that supports that kind of creativity. And finally, identifying and acting on opportunities. You know, you really don't want to dilly-dally, don't want to slow down, don't want to waste time. So the stuff that we've looked at. We looked at the characteristics of a group. We looked at the team development process, the group development process. That's the storming, norming, performing thing. You know, you really would want to know that, and really the idea of that common purpose and mutual accountability, and then those keys to team effectiveness we talked about. We'll be looking at a lot of examples of these things later on, and even throughout this segment of the course. So I'll see you next time.